A Dream Come True, Chapter 13. I don't understand a thing, said Oscar, still stupefied. He was sitting in the visitor's chair in the sheriff's own office and smoking a fine cigar, which the sheriff had offered him from the box on the desk. How did you manage to get there at exactly the right moment? Oscar kept on looking at the sheriff while he puffed on his cigar. Rasmus was standing behind Oscar's chair, breathing in the wonderful aroma of the smoke, but he wanted the sheriff to forget that he was there, so he was making himself as small as possible. The sheriff had been so good to them. He had saved their lives, and they had spent the rest of the night in his yellow house, and his maid had given them breakfast. Now he was sitting behind his desk, and had written down everything that Oscar had told him about Liff and Leander. Then he had offered Oscar a cigar. He was a good man, but he did have the power to send boys to orphanages, whether they wanted to go or not, so Rasmus tried to stay out of sight. I got your letter, said the sheriff. Without that letter, we wouldn't have had Liff and Leander behind lock and key now. The letter, said Oscar, amazed, but you couldn't have got my letter. Sure I did, said the sheriff. I got it late last night. I was at a party at the inn, and while we were sitting there having coffee, they came and said that there was someone who wanted to talk to me outside. I sent a message saying that I was busy and couldn't leave, but I shouldn't have done that, because suddenly Flora Carlson came storming in like a wild creature. Flora Carlson, said Oscar. I knew that it couldn't be little Sarah. No, Flora Carlson, that one knows what she wants, I can tell you. She handed me the letter as I was sitting at the table. You can't sit here collecting your big salary without doing anything, she said. She had found the letter on the floor of her porch. Oh, that little Sarah, muttered Oscar, and she knew it was important because she had read it. Now will you please do the rest, Sheriff, she said to me. Flora should get a medal, said Oscar. Yes, and you ought to have a medal too, said the sheriff. I've probably been a little unfair because I believed what Miss Hedberg's maid said about the tramp, who had threatened them with a gun. But as soon as I had read the letter, I realized that you were innocent, and I'm not so bad that I can't admit my mistakes. Oscar looked pleased. All's well that ends well, he said. He blew out a puff of smoke, which Rasmus sniffed blissfully. Cigars smelled so gentlemanly, but he kept his eyes on the sheriff and didn't forget for a second about the orphanage, although the sheriff was telling them such exciting and interesting things. The sheriff thanked Oscar because he had warned him about Anastina. I rushed off to Miss Hedberg as soon as I had read the letter, and I think I got there just in time. Last night she regained consciousness. I don't want to think the worst of that stupid Anastina, but it was probably a good thing that we arrested her when we did. Do you think that Miss Hedberg will get better? Asked Oscar eagerly. I certainly hope so, said the sheriff. I went there to deliver her necklace a while ago, and you can imagine how happy she was. She'll probably give me a big tip the next time I sing for her, Oscar chuckled, and went on. So Anastina is locked up now. The sheriff nodded. It was when we were going to lock her up last night that we realized you were about to run away. We followed you the whole time, Bergson, Anderson, and I. That Bergson is an idiot, said Oscar. Maybe, said the sheriff, but he is one of the best shots in the country, which you perhaps had occasion to notice last night. Yes, never did an idiot come at a more convenient time, said Oscar. He got up. Now I hope I'm free. Of course, but this brave little Vasterhaga boy, the sheriff looked at Rasmus. Rasmus didn't wait to hear any more. It took him only a couple of seconds to get outside the door and start running for his life, but behind him he heard Oscar call, Wait for me, Rasmus. He turned around, and there came Oscar, running so that his rucksack bumped up and back down on his back. Don't let him take me, Oscar, said Rasmus, panting. When Oscar had caught up with him, "I want to be with you." "Dear me," said Oscar, worried. "Soon they'll arrest me for kidnapping instead. Boys like you shouldn't be wandering around on the road. But if it's only until I find someone who wants me," begged Rasmus. Deep down, he didn't believe that himself. He felt almost as if he were trying to fool Oscar, and said as he said it, because he didn't really think that he would ever find someone who would want him. But he was wrong. After they had been walking the whole day, Rasmus began to be tired. "Where are we going to sleep tonight, Oscar?" he said. Oscar kept trudging cheerfully along in the dust. He seemed to be able to walk any distance without getting tired. "We'll always find some place to lay our weary heads," he said. "What a lot of different places I've slept in since I ran away," mused Rasmus. 2 nights in barns, 1 night on the floor of the empty cottage, 1 night at little Sarah's, and 1 night at the sheriff's. I wonder where I'll be sleeping tonight. It's sort of exciting never to know ahead of time." "Well, yes, I suppose so," said Oscar. Rasmus looked dreamily toward the red evening sky. "I wonder where I'll sleep all the other nights of my life." "Who knows?" said Oscar. They walked along in silence for a while. The road was narrow and hilly and winding and had many gates and barriers. "I've opened 16 gates today," said Rasmus. "I've kept count. Over there is another one, but it's already open." "There have always been a lot of gates on this road," said Oscar. "How do you know? Have you ever been here before?" "Many, many times," said Oscar. They walked through the gate. There was a sign nailed to the gatepost, which Rasmus stopped to read. "I always shut the gate when I go through, but oh, you lazy bones, you never do." "It seems to have been the lazy bones who went through the last time," said Oscar. "Come, let's sit down for a while and take in the beauty of the landscape." On the other side of the gate was a lovely little meadow, with lush green grass and lots of flowers. Rasmus closed the gate properly behind him. At least nobody was going to be able to call him a lazy bones. Oscar was already sitting in the grass among the bluebells and daisies. And Rasmus threw himself down beside him. It felt good to rest his legs. "If I were a cow I would stay in this meadow and refuse to budge," said Oscar. He scratched his head and said, as if to himself, "Isn't it funny that I'm unable to stay in one place, but just have to keep on walking and walking? No matter where you go, it's about the same. Grass and flowers and trees and the sky and the forest and the moon and houses. So therefore I don't understand why I can't stay in the same place for any length of time. But it's fun to keep on walking," said Rasmus, "at least in the summer, but in the winter it's nice to have a house to live in." "Yes, in the winter you get frostbite," said Oscar. In the distance they heard the sound of horses' hoofs and carriage wheels, and Rasmus got up and ran to the gate as fast as he could. Who knows, maybe he could earn himself a tip. It was a carriage with seats both in front and in back, and a man was sitting alone holding the reins. "This is Mr. Nelson from Sten Farm," said Oscar. "He's a good farmer." Rasmus held the gate open wide and bowed deeply as the farmer drove through. "What a polite little boy," said the farmer, holding in the reins. Then he caught sight of Oscar, who was sitting in the grass at the side of the road. "Well, well, there is Oscar. So you're round these parts again. It's about time." Oscar nodded. "Yes, I'm back. Can we ride along with you?" "Yes, hop in," said the farmer. Oscar and Rasmus quickly scrambled into the back seat, and the carriage rolled on. "Here's a tip for you," said the farmer, and he gave Rasmus a 5-cent piece. Rasmus blushed with delight. It was just amazing how those coins had rained over him this last week since he found the first one at the ice house. Rasmus glanced at the farmer. He looked kind, and he wasn't old at all. His face was tanned, and his eyes were very blue. "Where did you find that boy, Oscar?" he said, pointing with his thumb over his shoulder at Rasmus. "I picked him up on the road," said Oscar. "He's going to be with me for a while. Doesn't he have a mother who can take care of him?" "No, he doesn't, poor thing." Rasmus kept on staring at the sunset. He felt shy when people talked about him in his presence. "If you want to know the truth, the boy has run away from an orphanage, and now he is looking for a home." The farmer nodded. "Yes, I thought it was the Vasterhaga boy I read about in the paper yesterday." He turned around and looked at Rasmus in a friendly way. "Why did you run away from the orphanage?" he asked. Rasmus continued to stare at the sunset and didn't answer. But when the farmer repeated the question, he said quietly, "I didn't want to stay there." Perhaps the farmer thought this was reason enough, because he didn't pursue the question. The road had lots of curves and hills, and there were still more gates, which Rasmus opened. At last they came to a big hill which was so steep that Oscar and Rasmus got out and walked beside the carriage. "Now we're almost at Sten Farm," said Oscar. As they walked up the hill, they could see the farmhouse, high on a hill. It was a beautiful red house, and the evening sun shining directly on it made it look cozy and welcoming. "Can't we ask if we can sleep there tonight?" Rasmus asked Oscar. But when they came to the fork in the road, it was the farmer himself who made a suggestion. "Do you want to come in and have something to eat?" "Do we, Rasmus?" asked Oscar teasingly. "Yes, thank you," said Rasmus at once. Oscar had taught him that you should never say no when food was offered, because you never know where the next meal would come from. "I'll probably get something besides food, maybe a lecture too," said Oscar, looking at the farmer, but he didn't get an answer. A while later they were sitting at the big folding table in the farm kitchen eating sausages and bacon with their host. His wife poured Rasmus a glass of milk and gave him bread with lots of butter. Then she laughed and said, "This is the smallest tramp who has ever sat in my kitchen." And believe me, there have been many here. Rasmus liked her at once. She had blonde, curly hair and a gentle, serious face, and she was pretty. While Rasmus was eating, he was listening to Oscar telling him about Liff and Leander and Miss Hedberg's necklace. It will most likely be in the paper," said Oscar proudly. "Then you can read all about me and Rasmus, king of the fighters." Miss Nelson was looking at Rasmus. She looked at him for such a long time that he finally turned his head away. "Poor little thing," she said. "Weren't you happy at Vasterhaga?" Rasmus stared down into his plate and didn't answer. "How are things at Vasterhaga?" continued Miss Nielsen. "We have been thinking of going there to look for a foster child, but we haven't got around to it yet. We should have gone this winter, but then I had some trouble with my arm." "Yes, we just haven't got around to it yet," said her husband. Rasmus raised his eyes from his plate and looked at Miss Nielsen. "You would probably want a girl," he said shyly. Miss Nielsen smiled. "No, as a matter of fact, we had been thinking about a boy because of the farm. Since we don't have any children of our own, we have no one who can take care of the farm for us later on." "Yes, we did have a boy in mind," said the farmer. "With curly hair," said Rasmus. Miss Nielsen looked at him in amazement and laughed. "Yes, how did you guess? I had pictured him with curly hair, I really had." Rasmus nodded. "I understand," he said, and chewed persistently on a bacon rind. "But of course straight hair will be all right too," said the farmer, and he playfully pulled at one of Rasmus' straight tufts of hair. "Yes, it isn't the hair that counts after all," said Oscar. "If I were you, I would take Rasmus, the king of the fighters, with straight hair. That is, if he wants to himself, of course." Miss Nielsen smiled at Rasmus. "Would you like that?" Rasmus felt shaken. Was it possible that they wanted him? Could there really be someone in the world who wanted him? "Would you like that?" the pretty lady had asked so casually. Would he like it? They were so kind and handsome, both Mr. Nielsen and his wife, and they must be rich too. The kitchen was so attractive, with copper pots on the walls and hand-woven rugs on the floor. The house was big, with many rooms, and they had 2 maids and a big red barn, so surely they must be rich. Rich and kind and handsome, and they wanted him. "You can stay with us for a few days first, and then we'll see if we get along," said Mr. Nielsen. "Perhaps this isn't something you decide on the spur of the moment." "I'm sure I would like it very much," said Rasmus shyly. "You'll never get a better boy," said Oscar. Miss Nielsen looked gravely at Rasmus. "Yes, I think I could become very fond of you," she said. Afterward, she served them coffee on the veranda, and then Rasmus was left alone with Oscar. It was only then that it dawned on him that now he would be separated from Oscar, and it came as a blow to him. "Oscar," he said, "do you think I ought to stay here?" "Of course you should stay. You'll never find a better home." Rasmus was quiet. In a way he had been hoping that Oscar would say something else, that he couldn't be without Rasmus, that the two of them belonged together, but he didn't say it. And of course Rasmus would be a nuisance when Oscar wanted to go on the road. "You can walk much faster now when I'm not along," said Rasmus, and his voice trembled a little. "You can walk many more miles a day." "Yes, of course I can," admitted Oscar, "but the miles are about the same, all of them, so it doesn't matter how far I walk." Rasmus sighed. "I hope you won't meet any more gangsters when I'm not with you." "Oh, there couldn't be that many around, and you bet I'll do all I can to stay clear of them." Rasmus was quiet for a while, and then he said, "When you go to bed tonight, you'll be all by yourself." Oscar took Rasmus' hands in both of his. "Then I'll be by myself. That won't be easy for old Oscar, but it'll be nice for me to know that you're sleeping in a nice little room at Sten Farm tonight and all the other nights, and that you don't have to roam the roads." Rasmus swallowed hard. "Think if we never see each other again, Oscar." Oscar was still holding his hands. "Of course we'll see each other one fine evening when you're sitting in the kitchen having supper with your father and mother. There'll be a knock at the door, and God's best friend will be standing there, and he'll say, 'I wonder if I may sleep in your hayloft tonight.' There you'll be, fat and happy, and you'll say, 'Of course, won't that be fun?'" But Rasmus didn't think that would be fun. His eyes began to get a glassy stare, and Oscar continued, "Besides, I'll be coming around more often than you think. I promise you will see each other again." "Honestly, Oscar, as sure as amen in church. And think what fun you'll have with all the horses and cows and calves and pigs here." "Do you think they have a cat here?" said Rasmus. Miss Nielsen came just then to get the coffee tray and overheard his question. She said, "No, we have no cat because I can't stand them, but our dog had 5 puppies yesterday. We can go and have a look at them tomorrow. 5 puppies can make a little boy of 9 forget all the sorrows in the world? Rasmus was overjoyed. Tomorrow would be a wonderful day. You are probably very tired now, said Miss Nielsen. I'll come right away and show you where you are going to sleep. Then she went out with the coffee tray. We'd better say good-bye now, said Oscar. I'm sleeping in the hayloft tonight, and will take off early in the morning, but you'll come and see me soon, said Rasmus anxiously. Somewhere within him a voice whispered that he would probably never see Oscar again, and that was a thought he couldn't bear, but he didn't want to think about it right now. He was so sleepy. And then there were the puppies he was going to see tomorrow. He took Oscar's hand. Thank you for letting me go with you on the road, and thank you for being so good to me. Thank you, said Oscar. I think you're a fine fellow, even though you have straight hair. Then Oscar left. Rasmus stood on the veranda, watching with blurred eyes as he walked away in the twilight with his rucksack on his back. He went up the ramp to the hayloft, and Rasmus saw him open the big door. Then he disappeared inside, and Rasmus couldn't see him any more. Chapter 14. Homecoming. Rasmus woke up early the next morning. He knew that it was early because the sun that was streaming in under the dark blue roller shade was the early morning sun, and the sounds he heard in the house was morning sounds. Someone was banging around the iron stove down in the kitchen, and someone else was grinding coffee. Sleepily he looked around the room. It was a lovely little room, and this was the softest bed he had ever slept in. Then he heard what he thought sounded like his new father and mother in the kitchen. He immediately recalled their kind faces. It was exactly the kind of father and mother he had dreamed about at Västerhaga so many times, yet it was a miracle. He had his own home and a father and mother at last. But why wasn't he happy? Why, on the contrary, did he feel so terribly sad? The more wide awake he became, the sadder he got, until finally he was more miserable than he had been since he ran away from Västerhaga. Something was tearing him apart inside. He was so miserable, he thought he would die. He tried to think about the puppies he was going to see, but it was impossible when he was so sad. Oscar, it was Oscar he was longing for so terribly. His heart ached, and there was only one cure. He had to find Oscar and talk to him, beg to be allowed to go on the road with him again, but it was probably too late. Most likely Oscar had already gone. Rasmus could almost see him wandering along a distant road in the morning sun, far, far away. Oh, how would he ever live without Oscar? With a cry he flew out of bed and began to put on his clothes. He was so unhappy and in such a hurry that his hands shook when he was trying to button his shirt, and he had a hard time getting his pants on. He met Miss Nielsen in the doorway. Why did she have to come now? He didn't have time for any explanations. I have to go and tell Oscar something, he mumbled, and rushed by her. I think that Oscar has already left, she called after him. I saw him come out of the hayloft a half-hour ago. Blind with tears, Rasmus ran down the stairs and out in the farmyard. He realized that Oscar must have left, but he had just had to see for himself. He had to convince himself that there was nothing to hope for. Like a madman, he raced over the farmyard, toward the barn, and up the ramp, where he had seen Oscar disappear the night before. With a great effort, he pushed open the big door to the hayloft. After the strong sunlight outside, it seemed completely dark. He couldn't see a thing and kept on sobbing, "Oscar, Oscar." There was no answer, and he began to cry out loud. Now his eyes had become accustomed to the dark, and he looked around the desolate hayloft. They still hadn't started to bring in the hay at Sten Farm, and the loft was as empty as a desert, and there was no Oscar. Rasmus moaned. It hurt so much inside him that he couldn't stop. Terrible sobs raked his whole body. He leaned his head against the wall and made no effort to control himself. Then he heard the door open behind him. Miss Nielsen was probably coming to fetch him just when he needed to be alone. She mustn't hear him cry. He tried terribly hard to stop, but he couldn't. He was crying worse than ever. He was ashamed and hid his face in his hands. He leaned against the wall and let the tears run down between his fingers. "This is certainly a sad morning song," he heard someone say, but it wasn't Miss Nielsen's voice, it was Oscar's, and there was Oscar standing beside him. Rasmus rushed at him and clung to his arm. "Oscar, I want to be with you. You have to let me go with you." Now," said Oscar. "Let's sit down out here in the sun and talk it over." He pulled Rasmus outside with him. They sat down on the ramp, with their backs toward the door, and Oscar put his arm around Rasmus' shoulders. "Look at this, Rasmus," he said, pointing to the farm. "Look what a beautiful farm you'll live on. In a little while they'll be leaving with the milk, and you can go along. Then when you come home, you can go and look at the new puppies, and talk with your mother and father." "I want to be with you, Oscar," sobbed Rasmus. "Your very own father and mother. Just think about that," said Oscar. "You have been looking for them for such a long time, but I'd rather be with you and go on the road. Can't you be my father?" "A tramp for a father? How would that look?" "You don't want a tramp for a father." Oscar sounded almost angry. "Yes, a tramp like you," mumbled Rasmus. "But you've said all along that you wanted a father who is handsome and rich." Rasmus turned and looked at Oscar through his tears. "I think you're quite handsome." Then Oscar laughed. "Yes, as handsome as a bride, and rich too. The sheriff gave me $10, so I'm rich. But we don't need so much money to go on the road," Rasmus said, "and it doesn't matter if I get frostbite in the winter. I want to go on the road with you anyway. Please, Oscar." He couldn't say any more because now he was crying again. For a long time Oscar was quiet. Then he put his hand on Rasmus' shoulder and said slowly, "Well, if that's what you want, that's the way it's going to be." From Rasmus came a deep, happy sigh, and slowly a smile lit up his tear-stained face. He pulled Oscar by the sleeve. "Come, let's go right away." "No, first you have to go and tell Miss Nielsen that you have changed your mind." Rasmus looked anxious. "Must I? Couldn't you?" "No, my boy, that you have to take care of yourself. It isn't easy to tell people that you don't want them as parents, and for someone as shy as Rasmus, it's a terrible ordeal." But Rasmus was prepared to do anything in order to be with Oscar. He went over to the water trough in the barnyard and washed all traces away of tears from his face. Then he waved to Oscar to bolster his courage and took off toward the kitchen with determined steps. Both the farmer and his wife were there having breakfast. Rasmus had hesitated at the door the way tramps are supposed to. A wave of terror shot through him. Now he would have to begin explaining. What was he going to say? Would they be very angry? "I'd rather be with Oscar," he mumbled. At first there was a silence in the kitchen, and then Miss Nielsen said, "Come and sit down and tell us why you'd rather be with Oscar." Rasmus squirmed. "I'm more used to him," he said quietly. Miss Nielsen wanted to push him over to the table, but he resisted. He planted his feet firmly on the floor and struggled like a stubborn mule. He was so afraid that they would try to keep him from going to Oscar. "You need some food in you if you're going on the road again," said the farmer, laughing. "And you'd better hurry because Oscar is probably waiting," said Miss Nielsen. That didn't at all sound as if they were going to try to keep him against his will. He stopped struggling and let himself be pushed over to the table. He cautiously sat down on the edge of a chair. and looked uncomfortably at the two who were to have been his father and mother. "Now we won't get any help with the puppies," said Miss Nielsen. Rasmus lowered his eyes. "I'd rather be with Oscar," he mumbled. Miss Nielsen stroked his cheek. "Don't look so sad," she said. "I guess we'll have to go to Vasterhaga and see if we can find someone else to take care of the puppies." Rasmus suddenly became so excited that he forgot his shyness. "I know who is the right one," he said. "You have to take Gunnar. He has straight hair, but otherwise he's okay. He is the best one there. I know all the children, and Gunnar is the best. And he doesn't want to go on the road," said the farmer teasingly. "No, he wants to be on a farm more than anything else. He likes animals so much, and he doesn't say bad words. Big Peter and Emil and almost all the others do. Gunnar is the best one." "I guess we'll have to take a look at this Gunnar then, since he is so good," said Miss Nielsen, and she gave Rasmus a huge plate of cereal. When he was about to leave, he shook hands with them both. He looked at Miss Nielsen with big, serious eyes. "Don't take a girl with curly hair," he said pleadingly. "Please take Gunnar." Oscar and Rasmus started walking along the road that lovely sunny summer morning. It had rained during the night, and Oscar took big steps over the puddles, but Rasmus plowed right through them so that it splashed all around him. "My feet feel so happy," he said, when he saw the mud oozing between his toes. "I'm happy all over." Oscar laughed. Yes, it must feel good to have got rid of a large farm with horses and cows and everything. Rasmus happily splashed through the next puddle. "Do you know what I've been thinking, Oscar?" "No, but it's something wise and clever, I'll bet." "I've been thinking that when you are on the road, you really own everything you see." "Well, in that case you haven't made a bad swap," said Oscar. "Not if you own all this," he said, pointing to the landscape which lay before them, freshly washed in the morning sunlight. He stopped for a moment as if to take everything in around him. "Gosh, how green and beautiful everything is at this time of year. No wonder I feel the urge to be on the road." Rasmus skipped happily along beside him. "Everything belongs to us. The birch trees are ours, and the sea is ours, and the fields are ours, and all the bluebells, and the road is ours, and the puddles are ours." "The puddles are yours," said Oscar. "One is enough for me, and I'll give that away too if I have to." "But the houses aren't ours," said Rasmus, "because they belong to other people." "We won't think about that," said Oscar. "The houses are ours too, one house at least." Rasmus' face grew serious, and he looked longingly at the little gray cottages they passed. "Yes, you and I ought to have one house," he said with a little sigh. "A house where we could live in the winter and not get frostbite." "Yes, that would be nice," Oscar agreed. But the sun was so warm and the winter was far away. They didn't have to worry about a house yet. They walked on, and Rasmus owned all the green fields and meadows and lakes he saw, but he didn't bother about the houses. They left the settlement behind them and came into the deep forest. The sun filtered through the tall, straight pine trunks, and the little pink bells of the twin flowers seemed to be ringing in the most beautiful day of summer. "We are going to walk through the Sten Farm woods," said Oscar. "All these trees could really have belonged to you, but I'd rather be with you," said Rasmus, and he looked adoringly at Oscar. Oscar looked at the happy, barefoot youngster running beside him, thin and long-haired, covered with mosquito bites, in patched homespun pants and a blue-striped shirt which had long been in need of washing, a tramp from top to toe. "Then I have a confession to make," said Oscar. "I want to be with you too." Rasmus got red and couldn't say anything. It was the first time that Oscar had said that he wanted him. He felt still happier if that was possible. He took gay leaps over the puddles and felt as if he could walk any distance. Soon they came to the other end of the woods, and the road curved softly down toward a lake. There was a little gray cottage, just like all the others they had seen, with a couple of apple trees, and surrounded by a fence, badly in need of repair. Oscar stopped at the gate. Rasmus laughed. "You're crazy, Oscar. Are we going to sing here?" "No, we are going to sing as little as possible around here," he said, as he walked toward the house. Rasmus followed him. There was a woman standing with her back toward them, hanging up towels on a clothesline stretched between two apple trees. "Martina," said Oscar. The woman turned around. She had a heavy, broad face, and she didn't seem at all pleased to see Oscar. "So here you are," she said. Rasmus stopped a few paces away. This was obviously someone Oscar knew, but she wasn't very nice to him. In fact, she was angry. She pointed at Rasmus. "Who is that?" Oscar gave Rasmus an encouraging look. "Well, I've sort of acquired a son en route, but he's so small you hardly notice him around. His name is Rasmus." The woman's expression didn't change, and Rasmus began to wish that they would get out of there. "How have you been while I've been on the road this time?" Oscar asked her, and he sounded almost worried. "What do you think?" said the woman. "I've worked like a dog, and still I haven't been able to make ends meet. But of course that doesn't matter so long as you can be out gallivanting around the roads." "Are you very mad at me, Martina?" said Oscar humbly. "Yes, I am," said the woman. "I'm so mad I'd like to slap you." She was still for a moment. Then she did something amazing. She put her arms around Oscar's neck. And laughed and said, "Yes, I'm mad, but oh how glad I am to have you back home again." Rasmus stood there utterly confused, and didn't understand a thing. Did Oscar live here? Was there really some place where Oscar actually lived? He had never pictured Oscar as having a home. Oscar was the wanderer, day in and day out, summer and winter. Oscar couldn't live anywhere, but if he did live here, who was this Martina? Was he married to this woman? Rasmus was standing beside the apple tree trying to figure it all out. The happy feeling had left him, and he suddenly felt abandoned. Oscar and Martina were looking at each other and laughing. It was as if Rasmus no longer existed. They didn't care about him, but suddenly Martina let go of Oscar and came up to him. She stood in front of him with her hands on her hips, big and broad, almost as big as Oscar. Her eyes were kind and happy. She laughed at him, but it was a kind laugh, as if something had struck her as being very funny. "So, Oscar, you've gone and got yourself a boy on the road," she said, looking Rasmus up and down. "Yes, he's a funny little fellow. Can you imagine? He wants a tramp for a father. He would rather have me for a father than Nielsen at Sten Farm. What do you think about that?" "If he wants you for a father, he doesn't have much sense," said Martina. "No, that's true, but if he got you for a mother, he would be doing all right." "This is quite sudden," said Martina, "but your crazy ideas are always sudden." Oscar: "Doesn't the boy have any parents?" "No," said Oscar, "he has no one but you and me." Martina took Rasmus under the chin, and lifted up his face so that she could see his eyes. She looked at him for a long time, and then she said, "Would you like that? Would you like to live here with us?" All at once, Rasmus knew that it was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to live with Oscar and Martina in the little gray house by the lake. Oscar and Martina weren't handsome and rich, and Martina didn't have a blue hat with feathers, but it didn't matter. This is where he wanted to be. "Are you sure you want someone with straight hair?" he asked shyly. Then she took him in her arms. No one had done that since the time he had an earache and had been allowed to sit in Miss Hawk's lap. Martina's arms were hard and strong, but still they felt soft, much softer than Miss Hawk's. "Do I want a boy with straight hair?" said Martina, laughing. "Yes, of course I do. I certainly wouldn't want a curly-headed one when my own hair is as straight as can be. One curly head in the family is quite enough," she said, and she looked at Oscar. Oscar was sitting on the steps playing with a little black kitten that was stroking itself against him. "A boy with straight hair or no one," said Oscar. "That's what we've always said, Martina and I." Rasmus' eyes were sparkling and his whole face lit up. "Rasmus," said Oscar, "have you seen this kitten?" Rasmus ran over and sat down on the steps beside Oscar. He picked up the kitten up in his lap and stroked him. "This is exactly the kind of kitten I dreamed about," he said. "Then that's your kitten," said Oscar. "You know, Martina, Rasmus and I have composed a song about a cat who eats herring and potatoes." "I have herring and potatoes on the stove in there. Would you like some?" said Martina. Oscar nodded. "Yes, thank you," he said, and then he sang in a thundering voice, "You can believe me if you wish, but potatoes and fish is just a little kid's dish." He took a firm grip on Rasmus' shoulder. "Come, let's go inside." Maybe Rasmus had been born in a little gray cottage like this. Maybe his first days had been spent in a kitchen like this, with scrubbed floors and a wooden sofa and a folding table and begonias on the windowsill. Maybe that is why it felt like coming home to him when he climbed over the high threshold, worn down by so many feet. He was sitting with Oscar and Martina at the kitchen table, eating herring and potatoes. He was warm and happy. He had come home. Martina was laughing and talking noisily, and it was hard to believe that it was the same Martina who had been so furious before. He just couldn't be shy with her because she made him talk whether he wanted to or not. But it wasn't at all the same way grown-ups used to talk to him, just to be nice. Martina seemed to talk to him because she thought it was fun. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard," she said, when they told her about Liff and Leander. "I'd like to get my hands on those too." "Ha, they'll probably get enough punishment anyway," said Oscar, "but I know who you do have to talk to. You have to persuade the municipal authorities to let Rasmus stay here. I can't understand municipal talk. There's no point in my going because they'll only ask, 'What did you do last Thursday, Oscar?'" "That's something I would like to know too," said Martina. "I wonder what you were doing last Thursday when I was working in the parson's laundry until 11 o'clock at night." And while she cut bread and put herring in front of them, she talked about how hard it was to be married to a lazy bones like Oscar. "You see, Rasmus, one fine morning I wake up and find Oscar gone, and on the kitchen table is a note saying, 'I'm off again.' That's all. What do you think about that?" Oscar didn't look sad at all, but continued to stuff himself with herring and potatoes and said happily, "Keep it up, Martina, keep it up." "I don't know what else I can say when I've already called you lazy bones," said Martina. Then Rasmus intervened in Oscar's behalf. "Oscar isn't really lazy," he said. "He told me that he doesn't always want to work, but when he works hard." Martina nodded. "That's true. Do you know what Nielsen said the other day? 'Oscar is my best farmer when he wants to be,' he said." "Now I want to work," said Oscar. "I'm going to ask God to take some vagabond blood out of me in exchange for a little more farmer's blood." Then he looked at Rasmus and smiled slyly. "But just the same, I think Rasmus and I will make a little tour come spring." Rasmus looked at him, his eyes full of admiration. How wonderful to have a tramp for a father. How wonderful to have God's best friend for a father. "Let's take one day at a time," said Martina. "Tomorrow you're going to mend the fence and dig up potatoes, and the day after tomorrow you're going to stand farm and help bring in the hay." Oscar nodded. "Yes, Nielsen told me, so I know already. But tomorrow Rasmus and I are getting up early to fish for perch." He turned to Rasmus. "We have an old rowboat here. We'll row out to a place I know. Do you like to fish?" Rasmus' face was radiant. "I've never done it," he said. "Then it's high time you did," said Oscar. Yes, it was wonderful to have a tramp for a father, and Martina for a mother. This was all he had ever dreamed of. Wasn't this what he had always said to Gunnar, that they should go out on their own and find someone who wanted them? The thought struck him like lightning. Gunnar! He almost choked on the herring. If Gunnar really came to Sten Farm, he would see him. It was hardly a mile through the woods, and he could go with Oscar when he worked on the farm. He could see Gunnar's puppies, and Gunnar could come here and see his kitten. Maybe Gunnar could come along fishing for perch sometimes. Of course, said Oscar, when Rasmus asked him about it. Gunnar can come fishing with us. And see my kitten, said Rasmus. And see your kitten, said Oscar. Rasmus couldn't sit still. It's impossible to sit still when you're so happy. At Vasterhaga, Gunnar used to say that the only animals we were allowed were the ones in our hair. Martina laughed. We don't want that kind around here, she said. By the way, you're both filthy. Go down and throw yourself in the lake for a while. Oscar sighed. Now it starts, he said. Rasmus went outside. What luck that he had a lake, too. This was truly a remarkable day, the most wonderful of his life. He stopped on the porch and waited for Oscar. There was his kitten sleeping in the sun. Yes, it was a day of miracles. He had a lake and a cat and a father and a mother. He had a home. The walls of the cottage were worn and shiny, almost like satin. What a beautiful house it was. With a thin, dirty little hand, Rasmus lovingly stroked the walls of the house that was his home.